It started like any other Thanksgiving. A warm table, a crackling fire, the scent of something roasting, rich, hearty, filling the air with memories of home, family, tradition. But by the time the truth came out, neighbors were vomiting on the front lawn, officers were pulling back in horror, and one detective would never look at a dinner table the same way again. Because behind that carefully set holiday feast was something no one could have imagined, not even in their darkest nightmares. And by the time you finish watching this video, you'll know the answer to the question clawing at your curiosity right now. How could a loving wife turn her own husband into dinner? Hey, it's just you and me right now. Let's talk. I want you to lean in for this one because what I'm about to walk you through isn't just another shocking true crime story. It's a psychological descent into something so disturbing. It's still being whispered about in online forums, local news archives, and police debriefs. You're not here by accident. You saw that title, and part of you said, no way this could be true. But another part of you, the part that's curious, maybe even a little afraid, you needed to know more. And you will. I promise. By the time this video ends, every detail, every hidden motive, every chilling twist will be laid out in front of you like that cursed Thanksgiving table. But you have to stay with me. Because the truth? It doesn't come easy. And once it's out, it can't be unseen. Now, imagine this, a quiet suburban neighborhood in upstate New York. Think white fences, trimmed lawns, friendly waves from porches. Nothing ever really goes wrong here. It's the kind of place where families grow up, retire, and pass on holiday recipes that have lasted generations. But behind the curtains of one charming colonial, something was festering. Not just a crime, not just a murder, but a transformation. A descent into madness so gradual, so insidious, that even the closest friends didn't see it coming. And it all centered around a woman named Linda Mayfield. The perfect wife on the outside. Charming. Involved in the community. She taught Sunday school. Volunteered at the food bank. Organized potlucks. Everyone loved Linda. Everyone trusted her. And then there was Greg, her husband. The guy who fixed your fence without asking for a dime. The one who remembered your kids' birthdays. Greg was the kind of man who didn't just light up a room, he made people feel safe. He and Linda were high school sweethearts, the type of couple others envied. So how did it come to this? How did Greg go from loving husband to holiday meat? As we dig deeper, I want you to really picture yourself in this world. Because that's what makes this case so terrifying. It could have happened on your street. It could have happened in your town. There was no warning. No big red flags. No trail of violence. But beneath Linda's warm smile was a darkness that had been brewing for years. And the real horror? She didn't snap. This wasn't a moment of rage. What happened to Greg was planned, prepared, seasoned. This was methodical, ritualistic. And if not for a single, unassuming slip-up, no one might have ever known the truth. And here's where I really want you to lock in. This video isn't just about a gruesome crime. It's about the psychology of control, obsession, and hidden depravity. We're going to explore how mental illness, trauma, and unchecked delusion can quietly warp the mind into something monstrous. I'm going to walk you through Linda's background, her relationship with Greg, and how one simple dinner invitation led police to the most shocking discovery of their careers. You'll hear how investigators used everyday clues, grocery receipts, social media posts, a single anonymous tip to slowly unravel the horror inside that home. And I'll show you how this case became one of the most talked about true crime stories in recent memory, trending across YouTube with keywords like true crime documentary, shocking murders, twisted mind, suburban nightmare, and real police interrogation. But here's the thing, none of those trending words can fully prepare you for what you're about to experience. Because this story doesn't just ask, how could someone do this? It asks something even darker. What if you lived with someone for years and never really knew them at all? That's what makes this case unforgettable. That's what keeps people up at night. I know this story is going to grip you, not because it's sensational, but because it's real. The characters in this nightmare walked the same sidewalks you do. They lived normal lives until the mask slipped. And when it did, Even the most seasoned investigators were shaken. As you listen, you might find yourself asking, could this happen to someone I know? Could I be missing the signs in someone close to me? And if you're thinking you'll just skip to the ending, trust me, you won't want to miss the psychological buildup. Because every moment matters in this case. Every eerie detail builds toward the sickening truth. And when you reach that final scene, when you find out exactly how the police discovered what was really in that oven, you'll understand why this story has haunted everyone who's heard it. But let's pause for a moment, because there's one twist you're not expecting. One detail that turns this case from horrifying to absolutely unforgettable. It has nothing to do with the crime scene. Nothing to do with the meal. It's something much more personal. And I'm going to tell you what it is right after this. So don't go anywhere. We're just getting started. Cliffhanger pause. Do you feel that chill running down your spine? Yeah, you should. Because what comes next will shake you to your core. Let's go back. Months before that fatal Thanksgiving, before the dining table was set with its grotesque centerpiece, before Linda Mayfield's name became synonymous with one of the most unsettling true crime cases trending on YouTube. At first glance, her life looked ideal, almost enviable. She was the embodiment of a picture-perfect suburban wife, early 40s, always dressed in soft pastels, never missed a local fundraiser, and spoke in a calm, soothing tone that people said could de-escalate any situation. She was a regular at the local farmer's market, always chatting with the butcher, asking detailed questions about cuts of meat, marinades, and brining techniques. Back then, it didn't seem strange. People just thought she was a foodie, someone who enjoyed cooking more than most. No one saw the obsession taking root underneath that polished surface. Her husband, Greg, on the other hand, was a people person through and through, known for his warmth, sense of humor, and how he always showed up when it mattered. A volunteer youth coach, he had this magnetic presence, the kind that made people feel like they mattered. To friends and neighbors, Greg and Linda were the gold standard of marital bliss. They threw annual holiday parties, coordinated Halloween costumes, and sent out those carefully curated Christmas cards that everyone secretly admired. But behind the doors of their pristine home, something was changing. Something subtle. Something dangerous. Around late August, just as summer was turning into fall, Linda stopped attending her weekly book club. No big announcement, just a few missed sessions at first, then radio silence. She told friends she wasn't feeling well, that she needed time to herself. Maybe to recharge. It started with bizarre search history, true crime forums, obscure cookbooks, medical research on anatomy, temperature chart, and because she had always been dependable, no one pushed back. They respected her space. What no one realized then was that Linda was already slipping into a private world that blurred fantasy and reality. In the weeks that followed, the world seemed to hold its breath. News outlets scrambled to piece together the story. What had once been just a whisper of a conspiracy theory buried on internet forums was now front-page news. Human experimentation ring exposed, corrupt mental health program unraveled, survivors speak out against shadow project. The headlines bled into every home across the country, forcing families to confront the idea that people like Dana, like Rachel, weren't delusional, but silenced. The footage of Bray's confession leaked through encrypted forums before major platforms could scrub it, and by then, the damage to those in power was irreversible. Lawsuits began to stack up. Independent investigations opened. And suddenly, no one was above suspicion. But for Dana, vindication didn't come with comfort. The truth had freed her, yes, but it had also fractured something she could never quite repair. She no longer walked with the certainty she once had, because everything, every instinct, every emotion, had to be questioned. That file with her name on it still haunted her. Prototype_2. What did it mean? Was she created? Modified? Monitored? Had her pain been her own? Or just another calculated outcome from a system designed to observe? Rachel tried to help her through it, sending voice notes from safe houses she moved between every few days. She was still on the run, still hunted by remnants of the machine they had exposed, but her tone had changed. It wasn't anger anymore, it was clarity. She'd found strength in becoming the whistleblower, in turning her trauma into a war cry that couldn't be ignored. She was speaking at underground forums now, talking to other survivors, helping them reclaim their narratives before they were twisted into data points. In one message, she told Dana, "It's not about what they did to us. It's about what we do next. We are the story now, and they can't delete us." That thought stayed with Dana every time she stepped outside, especially when she saw others like her. Strangers with tired eyes and guarded glances, people who maybe hadn't been part of the experiment but had been changed by something similar. Trauma, grief, betrayal. These weren't isolated wounds anymore. They were a common language. And in that shared understanding, she found the faintest flicker of peace. She didn't go back to the precinct, didn't try to reclaim her old life or dig further into the tangled roots of Project Mothlight. She chose instead to rebuild in a quieter place, a small Midwest town where no one asked too many questions. She opened a secondhand bookstore, tucked between a barbershop and a bakery, where people came not just for thrillers or romance novels, but for conversation. Real, unscripted, human interaction. And slowly, she began to feel grounded again. Some days she still woke up wondering if her memories were her own, if the grief she carried had been planted, or if it was simply her heart learning how to heal. But she had learned to live with those questions without letting them control her. One rainy evening, a woman came into the shop, soaked from the downpour, with a familiar flicker in her eye. She didn't give a name, just asked if Dana carried any books on trauma recovery. As Dana handed her a worn copy of a memoir about surviving psychological abuse, their fingers brushed briefly, and in that touch, something passed between them. Recognition, maybe. Not of faces, but of the journey. After a moment, the woman nodded. "They still think it's over," she said, almost to herself. Dana simply replied, "It never is." And when the woman left, Dana found a small folded note tucked into the book she'd given her. No signature. Just 5 words, scribbled in shaky handwriting. "They've already started again. R." She stood frozen in the doorway as the storm swept across the street, her reflection caught in the glass like a memory trying to break through. She didn't move, didn't panic, just stood quietly, letting the weight of that message settle in her bones. Because she understood now that some stories don't end, they evolve. Some truths don't stay buried, they shift, resurface, demand to be heard again and again. And as long as someone was watching, someone was listening, someone was willing to speak up, the silence would never win. So Dana locked the door, turned the closed sign to face the street, and sat back down at her desk. She opened her laptop, the same one she once used to trace the digital breadcrumbs that had led her to the nightmare, and she began typing again. Not as a victim, not as a survivor, but as a keeper of the story. Because somewhere, someone else was about to find themselves in the same darkness. And when they did, she'd make sure they knew they weren't alone. 2 of 2. As for different types of meat, her YouTube history became a chilling breadcrumb trail. Videos on how to debone a carcass, how to season unusual cuts of meat, and disturbing deep dives into cannibalism cases from history. She went from browsing home cooking channels to exploring content marked as restricted, disturbing, and frequently demonetized due to graphic content. If someone had looked closer, they might have seen the darkness brewing. But Greg, he had no idea. At least, not at first. What's eerie is that even in his private journal, which detectives would later uncover tucked in a dresser drawer, he described Linda as quieter than usual, distant, but not alarming. Just distracted. He chalked it up to stress, maybe the lingering impact of a miscarriage they had suffered years ago, something that Linda had never fully recovered from emotionally. Friends said she became more withdrawn after that, more isolated, and perhaps more fixated on the idea of control, controlling the home, controlling meals, controlling the pace of their life together. There was something heavy in the air during those final months, like the kind of tension that sits in your chest but you can't explain. And then came the arguments. Neighbors recalled muffled voices, shouting behind closed windows, something that hadn't been common before. But again, it wasn't enough to raise alarms. After all, what couple doesn't fight now and then? Now here's where things get even stranger. One of Linda's coworkers from the local co-op grocery store mentioned a shift in her behavior, something he brushed off at the time but later couldn't shake. She had asked about ordering large quantities of organ meat, tongue, liver, heart, claiming it was for an experimental Thanksgiving dish. When he pressed her for details, she just smiled and said, "I want to serve something unforgettable this year." At the time, he laughed. But looking back, he said it sent chills down his spine. He wasn't the only one noticing oddities. A neighbor spotted Linda digging in the backyard one evening, long after dark, wearing gloves and what looked like a rain poncho despite it being dry outside. When asked about it later, she said she was planting late-season tulip bulbs. Again, peculiar but not criminal. Then there were the deleted ones, recovered from Linda's laptop during the investigation, filled with dark fantasy stories. Emails. Some were drafts, others replies to anonymous usernames. The content was explicit, twisted tales involving domination, culinary horror, and control over another person's fate. Experts would later analyze these writings and call them pre-crime ideation, essentially a psychological rehearsal for what was to come. But at that point, no one had access to these warning signs. Not Greg. Not the police. Not the friends who called her Sweet Linda for years. Which leads us to the deeper question, was Linda mentally ill, or was she consciously cultivating a world of cruelty beneath her carefully manicured life? Just when you think this story can't get more tangled, in comes David, Greg's old college friend, recently divorced, who had moved back to town and was seen visiting the Mayfield house more frequently in the weeks leading up to Thanksgiving. Some suspected he and Linda were growing close, maybe too close. Others wondered if Greg even knew, but there was no concrete proof of an affair. Still, David's presence opens another possibility. Was he somehow involved? Was there a second person who knew what Linda was planning? Or worse, was he the intended target, and Greg was just in the wrong place at the wrong time? The mystery deepens when you factor in the anonymous tip that finally brought police to the Mayfield residence. A call placed from a burner phone, no voice ID, just a chilling message. You need to check the oven. That's it. No name, no address, nothing else. But the call pinged from a nearby cell tower, just close enough to trace it to someone who lived within a 5-block radius. Guess who also lived there? David. A coincidence? Maybe. But the more investigators dug, the more it seemed like everyone had a motive, everyone had a secret. Some suspected Linda was covering for someone else. Others thought David had uncovered the truth and tried to report it anonymously, scared of being connected to what she'd done. The truth was still out of reach, but one thing was becoming more apparent with each layer uncovered. Linda Mayfield was not who anyone thought she was. And as more evidence surfaced, hidden receipts, deleted messages, encrypted files on a second hard drive, it became clear that this wasn't just a crime of passion. This was something far worse. Something methodical. Something evil. But we're not done yet. Not even close. Because just as detectives started piecing it all together, something else surfaced. A chilling photograph, time-stamped just hours before Thanksgiving dinner. And once you see what's in the background of that image, everything you thought you knew about this case will be thrown into question. Don't look away. What happens next will change everything. Just when investigators thought they were starting to get a grip on the Mayfield case, as if the madness could finally be unraveled through forensics and interviews, the story took an unexpected and, frankly, chilling turn. It began with the disappearance of the hard drive. That secondary device, the one containing those encrypted files believed to hold key evidence about Linda's online activity, suddenly vanished from the evidence room. No record of it being checked out. No log entry. Nothing. Just gone. At first, detectives blamed internal error, maybe an overlooked transfer or a misfiled label, but when security footage from that day showed a 2-minute blackout, right when someone could have accessed the evidence room, things stopped feeling like procedural error and started reeking of interference. Someone didn't want that drive analyzed. And the question burning on everyone's mind was why? The FBI was brought in quietly, hoping not to spook the press or alert whoever was responsible, but even their cyber team ran into firewalls and deleted data that seemed too clean, too purposeful. Someone with advanced knowledge had been covering tracks long before Linda's arrest. That's when a second chilling discovery emerged. A note, handwritten, smeared with something red that investigators chose not to speculate about at first, was found inside a hollowed-out cookbook in Linda's kitchen. It read, "You're not ready for the truth. And you're not the first." No fingerprints. No DNA. Just that cryptic message. And the unsettling idea that this may not have been Linda's first attempt at something this sinister. As the case grew darker, so did the pushback. One detective, Claire Morrison, who had been quietly tracking Linda's history, reported being followed home multiple times. First, it was a black car idling across the street, then late-night knocks on her door, with no one outside. One morning, she found her dog's collar placed neatly on the porch, no sign of the dog. The message was clear: stop digging. But Morrison wasn't the type to scare easily. She doubled down, tracing Linda's family history, hoping to uncover anything that might explain the bizarre, violent shift in her personality. What she found wasn't a direct answer, but it raised even more alarming questions. Linda had been adopted at age 6, something no one had ever mentioned publicly. Her adoptive parents were deceased, but a long-forgotten case file from out-of-state showed that her biological parents were involved in a disturbing custody battle, one that ended in both of them being committed to a psychiatric institution. The records were sealed, but a redacted portion hinted at unusual dietary rituals and ritualistic behavior involving children. This wasn't just family trauma. This was generational horror. A psychological cycle that may have started long before Linda was even old enough to understand what was happening. Could it be that the seeds of her crime were planted decades ago? Things only got messier when David, the same man who had been visiting the Mayfield home, suddenly stopped cooperating with police. One day, he was answering calls, responding to interviews, handing over documents. The next? Silent. He ghosted everyone. Investigators found his apartment cleared out, nothing left behind except an unplugged landline phone and a single sticky note on the fridge that read, "She wasn't working alone." That bombshell ignited a whole new theory. Was there a larger conspiracy at play? Was Linda part of some underground group? Were the cookbooks, the encrypted messages, the organ meat orders, were they all coordinated with others? Theories started swirling: Reddit threads, TikTok deep dives, YouTube exposés titled things like "The Cannibal Cult Next Door" or "Linda Mayfield, the Thanksgiving Slaughter Queen." Viewers started dissecting every grainy image, every scrap of police audio, trying to find hidden meaning. But amidst all the chaos, Detective Morrison quietly received a tip from an anonymous email. No subject line, just a message. "You want the truth? Check the abandoned farmhouse on Route 6. Don't bring backup." She debated telling her team, but something about the warning, the urgency, the personal tone, made her believe it was real. Maybe dangerous, yes, but real. That night, under cover of darkness, she drove out alone, parked at the edge of the cornfield, flashlight in hand. The air was heavy, silent except for the distant buzz of power lines. The farmhouse stood like a ghost, boards nailed over windows, door hanging off its hinges. Inside, the place reeked of rot and mildew. Floorboards creaked under her boots. Then she found it, a trap door beneath the kitchen linoleum. She was standing in front of a table set for dinner in what looked like a dimly lit cabin, surrounded by 3 adults whose faces had been scratched out. The photo sent a chill down Dana's spine, not just because of its eerie quality, but because she recognized the setting. It was the same background that appeared in one of the grainy photos recovered from the hard drive that had mysteriously vanished from police custody, which meant someone still had access to it. Someone was still watching. Across town, a journalist named Dana Callahan, who had been independently investigating the Mayfield story for her rising true crime podcast, Buried in Plain Sight, received an anonymous package on her doorstep. No postage. No return address. Just a plain brown envelope sealed with red wax and marked with one word written in careful script: "Devour." Inside, she found a single Polaroid photograph, aged and creased, of what appeared to be Linda. Not recently, but as a child, maybe 10 or 11. The answers are closer than you think, but you'll have to keep watching. The next discovery will shake this entire investigation to its core. While Detective Morrison stood frozen in the dark beneath that crumbling farmhouse, heart racing, flashlight dead in her hand, backlit only by the dim spill of moonlight from above, something else was unraveling miles away, something that would tangle the Mayfield case in an even more disturbing web. Before Morrison could photograph everything, her flashlight flickered, then shut off. And from the top of the stairs, a voice echoed through the silence. "I warned you not to come alone."
Who was it?
Was it David? Someone else entirely? And what secrets lay buried beneath that farmhouse, waiting to be exposed? And under that, a staircase leading into a hand-dug cellar, walls lined with meat hooks, old freezer units, and walls covered in newspaper clippings of disappearances no one had ever connected to Linda. Each headline circled in red. Each victim uncannily similar in profile, middle-aged men, all last seen before a major holiday. The next morning, Dana tried to contact Morrison to compare notes, only to discover the detective had been reported missing. Her vehicle was found parked along Route 6, but the farmhouse she'd ventured into had since been burned to the ground, reduced to a smoking skeleton of ash and metal. No fingerprints. No evidence. As if someone had wiped the slate clean, erasing all traces of whatever truth had been buried there. Dana, now more entangled than she ever intended to be, realized the story she had been chasing for clicks and trending views, keywords like unsolved mystery, dark secrets, missing detective, and real horror story, had just become something far more personal. Because tucked into the photo was a small scrap of paper, torn from what looked like a journal, written in Linda Mayfield's unmistakable handwriting. It read, "She's not the only one who served dinner." That sentence opened a Pandora's box. If Linda wasn't acting alone, who else had been involved? And more disturbingly, how far back did this pattern go? Dana's research led her to archived reports of holiday disappearances dating back almost 15 years, cases that had never been solved, all within the same region, all involving missing men around middle age. A new theory began to form. Was Linda part of a network? A ring of individuals who used holidays, especially food-centric celebrations like Thanksgiving and Christmas, as cover for their crimes? And if so, how many others had slipped under the radar, quietly feeding off society's blind spots and assumptions? Meanwhile, back at the police department, something even stranger occurred. A DNA match that had previously linked one of the bones found in Linda's freezer to Greg Mayfield was now being challenged. A second lab test, run independently at a federal facility, indicated the remains belonged to someone else entirely, an unidentified male between the ages of 35 and 45, likely deceased for less than 2 weeks. This revelation detonated every theory investigators had been working with. If that wasn't Greg in the freezer, then where was he? And who had ended up on the Mayfield table that Thanksgiving night? The contradictions split the investigation in two. Half the team still believed Greg was the victim, the other half began to question whether he was alive and potentially involved. What if Greg hadn't been the target? What if he had helped cover something up and disappeared to avoid implication? Or worse, what if he had been helping Linda all along and vanished when things spiraled beyond what even he could handle? Every theory seemed plausible now, and with each new piece of evidence came more confusion, not clarity. As the public grew increasingly obsessed, the story surged to the top of YouTube's trending page. Videos speculating on Linda's motives, dissecting her old social media posts, and even analyzing the Mayfield's body language in home videos began to dominate the algorithm. Keywords like twisted couple, hidden agenda, and true crime with a twist were drawing millions of views. Dana found herself both horrified and captivated. She knew she was in deeper than she should be, yet she couldn't walk away. Not when every new clue seemed to whisper that the story wasn't just about Linda. It was about something bigger, something ancient, something ritualistic. Late one night, while reviewing audio logs from one of her recent interviews with a former neighbor, Dana heard something she hadn't caught the first time. In the background, buried beneath the interviewee's voice, was a faint, rhythmic thumping sound. She isolated the noise, ran it through audio analysis software, and nearly dropped her headset when the results came back. The rhythm wasn't random. It matched a pattern used in ceremonial drumming, specifically one associated with pagan feasts and sacrificial rites. It was the same rhythm found in a rare recording from an obscure cult investigated in the early 1990s. And guess who had briefly lived in the same region as that cult when she was a child? Linda Mayfield. Just as Dana began to record her findings for the next episode of her podcast, her power cut out. Her screen went dark. Her front door creaked open, and a voice, low, steady, and disturbingly calm, came through her phone's speaker even though no call had been placed. "You've seen too much. You have 3 days to stop." But stop what? Telling the truth? Following the trail? Or uncovering the one thing no one was ready to face? Because what Dana would find next would turn the entire investigation upside down and finally force the question no one had dared ask out loud. Was Linda Mayfield a monster or just a messenger for something far more terrifying? The truth was out there, but the price for finding it was only just beginning to reveal itself. The silence in Dana's apartment after the voice cut out was unbearable, so heavy it pressed against her chest like a weight she couldn't shake. Her mind raced, trying to rationalize what she had just heard. Maybe it was a prank, she told herself. Some obsessed listener or troll who wanted attention, who hacked her phone and timed the message to scare her. But she knew better. The voice was too calm, too rehearsed, and there was no trace of distortion or digital manipulation. It was real. Someone had been listening, watching, and waiting. Someone who knew exactly when she'd be most vulnerable. The sickening realization hit her as she scanned the dark corners of her apartment, her fingers trembling as she reached for the light switch. She flipped it. Nothing. Still no power. She grabbed her backup flashlight and checked the fuse box. Every switch was in place. This wasn't an outage. This was targeted. That night, Dana didn't sleep. She sat on her couch, every light in the apartment out, her phone clutched in one hand, a kitchen knife in the other. She kept replaying the warning over and over, trying to find something, an accent, a slip of emotion, anything that might help her identify who it was. But the voice was cold and untraceable, as though it had no face, no past, just purpose. By morning, she called the local police, filed a report, and tried to pretend things were under control. But the officer who took her statement seemed indifferent, distracted even, as if the moment she mentioned the Mayfield case, the energy shifted. Like he knew something he wasn't saying. Or maybe he had been told not to get involved. Things got worse 2 days later when her assistant, Rachel, didn't show up for work. At first, Dana wasn't worried. Maybe Rachel had decided to take a break from the madness. But when she called her phone, it went straight to voicemail. Then the text messages began bouncing back. That afternoon, she drove to Rachel's apartment, only to find the door ajar. Inside, everything was untouched, keys on the counter, purse on the table, laptop open mid-email, but Rachel was gone. Vanished, with no sign of struggle, no forced entry. Dana's stomach twisted as she stood in that apartment, realizing that the web was closing around her. People close to her were being pulled into the darkness. She wasn't just reporting the story anymore. She was the story. Her paranoia grew with every hour. Cars that once blended into the background now felt like they were following her. Conversations she had with sources mysteriously dropped mid-call. Even her email account was flagged for unusual activity, locking her out for almost 24 hours before she could get it back. But it was what she found in her car that pushed her over the edge. Taped to the back seat headrest was a photo of Rachel. The same kind of Polaroid she'd received before. But this time, Rachel's eyes had been marked out with a black X, and behind her stood the faint outline of a man, face hidden in shadow, but the same shape as the one she'd seen in the Mayfield footage. On the bottom of the photo, written in that same unsettling handwriting, was a message: "Stop digging or she disappears forever." Dana felt the walls closing in. She didn't know who to trust anymore. Every ally now felt like a possible threat. Every noise outside her window made her jump. She found herself wondering whether she should stop, whether it was worth it to keep chasing a story that was now actively destroying her life. But every time she considered quitting, she thought about the victims, those nameless, faceless people whose lives had been cut short and reduced to nothing more than clues. She couldn't let it end like this. She couldn't walk away, not when the truth was clawing to be found. But fear was creeping into her bones like a slow poison, dulling her instincts and clouding her judgment. Then, in the early hours of the morning, she received an email from an encrypted account. No subject line, just a file attachment labeled proof. Against her better judgment, she downloaded it and opened the folder. Inside was a video, grainy, shot on a shaky handheld camera, time-stamped exactly 1 year before Greg Mayfield's disappearance. The footage showed a dinner table in what looked like a cabin deep in the woods, with Linda sitting at the head. She was laughing, wearing the same apron that had been found in her kitchen during the search. Around the table were 3 men, none of them Greg. One looked drunk, another barely conscious, and the third looked terrified, his eyes darting to the camera as if begging for help. The video cut off suddenly, but not before capturing one final image, a freezer in the background with a label on it that read Harvest. Dana's skin crawled. This was real. And it wasn't just about Greg. It was about a series of men, each lured, each consumed in some twisted ritual, all while Linda wore the face of a friendly suburban wife. But now, with this footage, came another terrifying question. Who filmed it? Linda had always claimed she worked alone. Yet this video proved someone else was there. And that person was still out there, silencing anyone who got too close. Dana knew that by opening this file, by watching that video, she had crossed a line she couldn't come back from. She didn't know who to call. She didn't know where to run. But what she did know, without a doubt, was that the person or people behind this were still watching. They wanted her to see that video. And they wanted her to know the game had only just begun. And what would happen next would change everything. Just when Dana thought she had grasped the edges of the truth, when every breadcrumb seemed to point toward Linda as the architect of something vile and ritualistic, the entire narrative shifted in one shattering moment. It came during a routine scan of background documents she'd ordered on Linda's late father, Harold Krieger, a reclusive figure who died under mysterious circumstances more than 15 years prior. Until now, he'd seemed like a footnote, an afterthought buried in old obituaries and family photos. But a recently digitized archive from a local paper in Ellington County revealed something chilling. Harold hadn't died in a quiet accident like the reports had claimed. He'd been found in his garage, bound and mutilated, surrounded by bizarre carvings and animal bones. Authorities at the time had dismissed it as the work of local teens dabbling in satanic rituals, a wave of paranoia that swept small towns in the early 2000s. But there had been one person at the scene before police arrived, Linda. Only 16 at the time, she'd found her father's body, but oddly, she'd never mentioned it in any interview, therapy session, or court document. That omission alone was startling. But what made it devastating was what Dana found next. In the same archive, an old photo accompanied the article. Grainy and faded, it showed police at the scene, but one figure stood out in the background. Someone eerily familiar. Dana enlarged it, adjusted the lighting, and her breath caught. It was the same silhouette she had seen in the anonymous footage taken at the cabin, the same shadowy figure looming behind Rachel in the Polaroid. This wasn't just a man tied to the present. He had been there the entire time. Somehow, for nearly 2 decades, he had moved alongside this case, never seen, never questioned. A figure operating just behind the veil of public awareness, guiding Linda's descent or perhaps manipulating it entirely. Inside it, one video. She clicked, heart pounding, hands slick with sweat. The screen lit up with grainy footage of herself, sitting at her desk, typing. The video had been taken from inside her apartment. No timestamp, no audio, just the chilling realization that someone had been watching her the entire time. The footage cut to black and a single sentence appeared. He was never after Linda. He's after you. It also suggested something far worse, that everything Dana thought she understood about Linda's guilt had been manufactured, that the real villain had never been locked up. He had been out there, moving pieces on the board, feeding investigators just enough truth to keep them off his trail. And just as Dana began drafting a report to send to federal agents, her laptop crashed. Black screen. Files gone. When she rebooted, her hard drive had been wiped. Every interview, every photo, every clip of the anonymous footage, all gone. In its place was a single folder. What if she was a puppet, conditioned, controlled, programmed by someone who had found her at her most broken and reshaped her reality? That would explain her fragmented memory, the inconsistencies in her story, and the cold, robotic way she responded during interrogations. Digging further, Dana discovered something even more unnerving. Bray had been under investigation years ago for unethical experiments on trauma patients, accused of psychological manipulation under the guise of treatment. He had vanished before the case could go to court. Witnesses disappeared, files went missing, and eventually, the accusations were buried beneath bureaucracy and silence. The implication was staggering. What if Linda wasn't the mastermind at Aho, had worked with Linda during her stay in the hospital during college? Official records listed him as deceased after a car accident in 2013, but there was no death certificate, no obituary, no family claims. Just a closed case and a few vague mentions in campus logs. Ella, desperate to understand what she was really up against, Dana traced the shadowy figure back to a name, a former psychiatric counselor named Dr. Ellis Bray. And in that moment, everything Dana thought she knew collapsed. The Mayfield case wasn't about one woman's descent into madness. It wasn't about a cannibalistic dinner or a deranged family secret. It was about control, about legacy, about something ancient and systematic that had been hiding in the shadows, using people like Linda to cover its tracks. The mastermind had always been 2 steps ahead, and now Dana was on his list. There were no more allies, no more safe places, no more assumptions. Just a single, terrifying truth. She was inside the story now, and the ending hadn't been written yet. You said. Dana sat in her car for what felt like hours, the engine idling, her hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly that her knuckles ached. She couldn't bring herself to start driving, couldn't decide if she should head to the station, to the FBI, or just keep going until the road ran out. Her entire body was screaming for her to run, to disappear before the faceless threat lurking in the shadows found her. But something else, deeper, more stubborn, refused to let go. That part of her that had chosen journalism over a law degree, that craved the uncomfortable truth even when it burned, kept whispering, "You're the only one left who can stop this." It wasn't just a story anymore. People were missing, dead, or ruined. Linda was either a manipulated pawn or an accomplice who'd lost control. Rachel was still missing. And now, whoever had been behind the camera was after her. The danger wasn't abstract anymore. It was personal, and Dana knew she was running out of time. Then the phone rang. It was her brother. She almost didn't answer. He rarely called, texted now and then, sent a birthday message, but they hadn't been close since their father died. He'd always dismissed her obsession with dark stuff as toxic, said her podcast was just feeding society's addiction to trauma. But when she picked up, his voice sounded different, strained, like he was fighting to hold something back. He didn't ask how she was. Didn't even say hello. Just blurted out, "You need to stop this, Dana. I'm serious. Walk away." She was stunned into silence, heart hammering. When she finally managed to speak, she asked how he even knew what was happening. That's when he told her the part she hadn't seen coming. He used to work with Dr. Ellis Bray. Back when Dana was still in college, her brother had taken a short-term consulting role with a private behavioral research group called Pathwave Labs. He'd only lasted 8 months, claimed he left because the funding dried up, but now he admitted the truth. Bray had been running a clandestine program within the company, using trauma survivors to test radical cognitive reconditioning techniques. He didn't go into detail, just kept repeating, what they were doing, it wasn't therapy. It was training, rewiring people, making them believe things that never happened. And when Dana asked if Linda was one of them, the silence on the other end of the line said more than words ever could. Then came the real gut punch. Her brother confessed that he was approached again 6 months ago, out of the blue, by someone claiming to be from an intelligence firm tied to national security. They didn't ask him to work for them. They just wanted one thing, for him to keep tabs on her. On Dana. Every article she published. Every source she cited. Every step she took closer to reopening the Mayfield case. They paid him, promised protection if anything ever happened, but warned him never to tell her. "I didn't know it would go this far," he said, voice cracking. "I thought I was protecting you." Dana couldn't breathe. Her own brother, someone she had trusted if from a distance, had been feeding information to the very people who were now hunting her down. And yet, he wasn't the enemy. Not really. He was just another pawn, caught in something so much bigger than either of them had understood. Then he gave her an ultimatum. "There's a meeting tomorrow. They want to offer you a deal. You walk away from this story, everything, and in return, they wipe your digital footprint, make sure no one ever comes after you again. But if you go public with anything, if you keep digging, they won't just come for you. They'll come for Mom. For me. For anyone you've talked to." The line went dead before she could respond. Dana sat there in the dark, torn between two unbearable choices. Take the deal, disappear, and live knowing she let evil win. Or burn every bridge she had, put everyone she loved at risk, and chase a truth that might never be safe to tell. The weight of it crushed her, but even then, in the lowest point of her fear, she knew there was no real choice. Not for someone like her. She couldn't be the woman who ran. She had to be the one who stayed. Fought. Paid the price if she had to. But that didn't make it any easier to walk into what came next. And that next moment arrived faster than she expected. She got home to find her door wide open. Inside, the lights were on. The air was still. Nothing looked disturbed. But as she stepped inside, her eyes locked on her kitchen table. A single envelope sat there, her name printed on it, in the same jagged handwriting from the Polaroids. Inside was a photo, Rachel. Alive. Bruised. Bound. Behind her was a man wearing a mask, and in his hand was a newspaper from that morning, proving it was recent. Scrawled on the back of the photo were the words, "She talks, she dies." And that was the moment Dana knew she'd crossed a line she couldn't uncross. The truth had a price, and it was already being collected. The moment Dana stepped back into her apartment, everything felt wrong. The silence wasn't the kind that came from solitude. It was hollow, disturbed, too still. She scanned the room, every instinct on high alert, her thoughts racing as she replayed the last few days in her mind. The warnings, the surveillance, the ultimatum, all of it had been building toward something. And now, the last thin layer of safety she'd been clinging to was gone. Her phone buzzed again with a message from an unknown number. "You were never supposed to get this far." That was all it said. But it was enough to confirm what her gut had been screaming for days. This wasn't just about Rachel. Or Linda. Or even Bray. The people pulling the strings had names she hadn't even heard yet. This web reached farther than she could have imagined. She packed a bag in under 3 minutes, knowing she wouldn't be coming back. As she stepped out the door, she barely made it 2 blocks before a dark SUV cut her off at the corner. Her first instinct was to run, but the door opened and a familiar face stepped out. Detective Martin Wells. Retired, supposedly. The one person she had believed was on her side from the beginning. He looked older than she remembered, eyes sunken and voice hoarse. "Get in," he said, not a question, but an order. She hesitated just long enough for the second SUV to appear in the rear-view mirror. Then she got in. Inside the car, Wells didn't waste time. He handed her a flash drive and said, "What you're chasing isn't a case. It's an operation. You've been playing on a board built by people who don't lose. Until now." The drive, he told her, contained audio files, scanned documents, and private video logs, evidence that connected Pathwave Labs to a larger classified initiative, Project Mothlight. Funded quietly through a tech conglomerate based in Northern California, it had ties to experimental behavior research, memory reconstruction, and deep psychological profiling. Bray hadn't been a rogue psychiatrist. He had been their poster child. His work wasn't condemned. It was praised. Hidden behind terms like adaptive resilience modeling and controlled trauma simulation, the initiative had been running for nearly a decade, building psychological profiles that could be used to predict and manipulate human behavior on a mass scale. Dana could barely process it. "So, Rachel, Linda, they were test subjects?" she asked, already knowing the answer. Wells nodded. "Volunteers at first. Then not so much." He explained that when subjects started to resist or show signs of remembering, they were removed from the program and quietly discredited. Some were committed. Others simply disappeared. A few tried to speak out, and every single one of them either ended up dead, missing, or branded unstable. But Rachel hadn't been just another name. She had been Bray's breakthrough. The one who'd survived the conditioning and started to remember. That's why she vanished. That's why Dana had been targeted. Not because she stumbled into something by accident, but because Rachel had reached out to her. Deliberately. The final blow came when Wells admitted something else. "You weren't the only one she reached out to," he said slowly. "She came to me first." Dana stared at him, not sure she'd heard him right. "You knew this whole time?" she asked, voice trembling. "You let me risk everything while you sat back and watched?" He looked away, shame heavy in his eyes. "I thought I could handle it. I thought if I stayed close to the people running it, I could keep you safe. But I was wrong. They knew. They always knew." Betrayal hit her harder than any threat she'd faced so far. He had been her last thread to the system. The only one she believed had nothing to gain. And now he was just another name on the list of people who had chosen safety over truth. She took the flash drive, said nothing, and stepped out of the car. It was raining by the time she reached the train station. Not that she noticed. Her thoughts were spiraling, pulled in a dozen directions at once. Rachel was still out there. The operation was still running. And now she had proof, if she could survive long enough to share it. That night, as she sat in a barely lit motel room off the interstate, she opened the first audio file on the drive. It was a conversation between Bray and a man whose voice she didn't recognize. Cold. Methodical. Calculated. They weren't talking about therapy. They were talking about data sets, resistance thresholds, and pre-stimulus conditioning. They spoke about Rachel like she was a broken machine. Dana listened, jaw clenched, stomach churning. Every instinct told her to leak the files immediately. But something stopped her. One of the documents on the drive listed names, not just subjects, but active collaborators. People inside media networks, law enforcement, tech companies, even a senator. If she published this too fast, without understanding the full scale, they'd bury it. Or worse, spin it. Make her the unstable one. She couldn't just drop the truth. She had to prove it, expose it in a way they couldn't control. And that meant she had to go back to where it all started. Back to Bray's private estate. Back to the place where Rachel was last seen alive. She didn't know if she'd come out. But she knew this. Whatever was waiting for her there, it wasn't just the end of the story. It was the beginning of something much darker. The wind howled through the skeletal trees surrounding Bray's secluded estate, their twisted branches clawing at the sky like they were trying to escape something buried beneath the soil. Dana stood at the edge of the gravel driveway, heart pounding in her chest as she stared at the dark silhouette of the mansion. It looked untouched by time, as if it had been plucked out of some forgotten past and dropped into the present like a decaying monument to secrets no one was meant to find. This was where it had all started. Where Rachel's trail had gone cold. Where the whispers of Project Mothlight had first echoed through underground corridors and hidden recordings. And if Dana's instincts were right, this was where it would end. She slipped inside through a side entrance she had scoped out the night before, bypassing the old security system with the codes Wells had given her. Every step deeper into the house was like a descent into a personal hell. The air was heavy with the scent of aged leather and stale smoke, and each creaking floorboard screamed with the ghosts of the past. As she moved through the hallways, past rooms frozen in time, she spotted a familiar door at the far end, the study Bray used to lock himself in when the experiments became too messy for his public-facing role. She hesitated for a breath, then pushed it open. Inside, the room was dark but not empty. A massive wall of monitors flickered silently, feeding from live camera streams and old archived footage. Dana stepped closer, recognizing some of the faces, Rachel, Linda, even herself, captured in moments they never knew were being recorded. This wasn't just about behavioral science or therapy gone wrong. This was surveillance, manipulation, a grotesque experiment in control. "You think you buried me," Rachel continued, "but I was always the one watching." In that moment, everything shifted. A loud bang echoed from the lower floor, authorities storming the estate. Dana stepped aside as Bray lunged for her, his desperation finally breaking through his carefully constructed facade. They struggled, a brutal clash of rage and betrayal, until she managed to knock him to the ground with a hard swing of the metal keyboard base. Blood pooled at the corner of his mouth as she stood over him, breath ragged, eyes burning. "You're not in control anymore," she whispered. But just as the agents burst through the door and took him into custody, Dana noticed something strange, one of the monitors flashing a different name. Not Rachel, not Bray, but someone else. A politician, a CEO, a law enforcement official. Dozens of names, part of a wider network that spanned far beyond this house. Rachel had exposed the rot, but the roots were deeper than anyone imagined. And then the twist hit her. The last file on the drive, the one she hadn't dared to open, was labeled Dana_reconstruction_prototype_2. She stared at it, heart thudding like a war drum in her chest. Because now, for the first time, she wasn't sure if she had been investigating the project, or if she had been part of it all along. And with that terrifying realization, the screen went black.